Welcome to Aware. We are dedicated to communicating information that inspires your positive growth and change. Are you interested in a peaceful planet? Are you interested in optimal health? Are you living with purpose? Are you enjoying your life? We realize each person can make a difference, and our mission is to empower your awareness. The choices that you make in every moment shape your life, and we encourage you to realize that you have your own answers and to always listen to your own truth. We invite you to stay aware.
Hi, I'm Lisa Garr, host of The Aware Show, and I'm very, very excited to be with you today because we get to talk about one of my favorite topics. We all have one if we're listening to this show, a body, our bodies. And have you ever been in a situation where you've reached the end of your rope with your health challenges? You've been to every doctor, you don't know what to do, and you're really trying to discover the way back to your body's innate ability to heal itself, that incredible innate intelligence that your body has to heal itself. Well, that is our topic today, and I'm going to introduce our guest in just a second. First, I want to let you know that if you hear anything on the show that you like or you want to share it with a friend, because we're really committed to bringing information that inspires people's positive growth and change, you can always listen to the podcast, the Aware Show podcast. Because of podcasting, you can share the show right from the platform that you listen to, and you can share it right from there. So go to the Aware Show podcast. My guest today is Dr. Beth McDougall. She has for 20 years been transforming the practice of medicine, bridging innovative therapies, which are wonderful therapeutic devices, to thousands and thousands of patients. She's the founder and the medical director of the Clear Center for Health and the co-founder and medical director of Jyzen Labs, which is amazing. It's got incredible cutting-edge technologies for bio-optimization in Mill Valley, and her book is available to everyone. It's called Your Pristine Blueprint. It's about that very thing, the missing keys to health, longevity, reversing disease, radically transforming your life. There are a lot of possibilities within Dr. Beth McDougall's life. I can't wait for her to share those with us. Welcome to the show, Dr. McDougall. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
I'm so curious of why or how your journey got you started on transforming health and wellness, not just your traditional allopathic route with, providing pharmaceuticals and so forth for disease, but you really went well beyond what's expected in medical school. Tell me a little bit about why.
Well, just even as a young person, like in high school, had a couple minor health challenges, and I felt like there was a lot more to those challenges and a lot more I could do about them than I was hearing from the doctors I saw. And so that already got me kind of thinking a little bit outside the box. And I had a phenomenal childhood mentor who was a doctor himself, as well as a very wise man and a mystic and a philosopher and scientist. And he taught me a lot and was really one of the most brilliant people I've ever met to this day. And then I watched him develop Parkinson's disease and decline very quickly. So it was pretty heartbreaking for me because I was so close to him, and he was somewhat of a mentor for most of my early childhood, and even up into about age 20. And then I watched not only his body, but also his mind rapidly deteriorate. And right at the same time, my grandfather, who I was also very close with, developed a different neurodegenerative disease and also declined incredibly rapidly and was confined to a nursing home, couldn't move his body. His eyes darted back and forth rapidly, and he had what was then called a levopontocerebellar atrophy, which was just atrophy in these different parts of the brain. And again, I was always asking, well, why is this happening?
Right.
And he was a sign painter and, worked with a lot of toxic chemicals. And I felt like maybe there was something there. Also had a hunch he probably had a gluten allergy, thought that could be related. Turns out, sure enough, that particular illness, which is now called multisystem atrophy, has been associated with consuming gluten. There's phenomenal research on that.
Wow.
And actually the disease course can be modified by taking gluten out of the diet. So I had these two people that were really important to me, kind of watched them deteriorate before my very eyes. And then I was in medical school at that time and trying to bring everything I could to bear on their situation. And there was a dogma in the kind of medical world at that time that there was no healing possible in the central nervous system. And I just didn't buy it. I just really didn't agree with that. I knew that one day we would figure out how to heal central nervous system disorders. And I kind of came into this lifetime with just a knowing that all things are really resolvable. And we should be able to address all kinds of disease and actually heal.
You know, I hear you, by the way. My aunt has MS, and it's so hard to watch. Such a brilliant actress, comedian. Terry Garr is my aunt, and she has MS. And I just sometimes argue with God. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, you have these brilliant people who you've given these incredible gifts to, and then you just whoosh, it's just taken away. And I do love what you're saying, that there's got to be a pathway, and there's multiple. It's not a one fix at all.
No,
And
every situation is unique. Mm-hmm.
yes, and you've got to get to that place where you find out what's the systemic reason why the nervous system in the body goes haywire. Where do you even start? Like, you're a great health detective. Where do you start with someone that comes to you with these issues?
Well, yeah, it's something now I've really figured out over time, because I, kind of came out of the gate working with complex medical issues, and then got progressively more and more complex patients as, I was in practice longer and longer. And with the nervous system, I always look at, especially let's talk MS. MS is an autoimmune disorder, as you know, and so I always ask, what's the triggering factor in this situation? Because the body doesn't just naturally start fighting itself.
Right.
There's almost always a reason. I think one day we're not even going to have autoimmune disorders. We're not even going to use the word, because that is not what our body is innately, supposed to do. So there's always a reason why it starts. And very oftentimes there's a triggering factor, like an infection, let's say. And let's say the immune system is mounting an immune reaction to a protein on the surface of a bacteria or a virus. Sometimes that protein looks similar enough to our own tissues that the antibodies will cross-react with our own tissue proteins. And that's a process called molecular mimicry. And then the immune reaction will start against the body. So we see that in multiple sclerosis, but we also see it, with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So for example, that's where we have an autoimmune disease of the thyroid, where most oftentimes, majority of the time, people are mounting an immune reaction to gluten protein, which is in wheat, rye, oats, and barley and malt. And then that antibody cross-reacts with the proteins on the surface of the thyroid and leads to Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Now, in all cases of autoimmunity, whether it's in the brain or against your thyroid or in the gut, there's multiple possibilities of the underlying trigger, whether it's an infection or a food allergy or a toxin that tags the protein, binds to a protein, rendering it a little different looking to your immune system. Or in certain cases, there's a predisposing trauma.
Wow.
And oftentimes the stress of that trauma will synergize with other factors, but you want to try to figure out what are those kind of triggering factors, and then what factors in the body are allowing this to perpetuate.
You just named 7 factors. I mean, there's the virus, there's the food sensitivities, there's so many. What else did you mention? There's the
it's often an infection, a food sensitivity, a toxic burden, whether it's heavy metals or some
Right.
other form of toxin, or, some deep traumatic situation,
Wow.
or some combination thereof.
Wow.
So 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 that's what I'm usually looking for. And when you look at infections, there's so many options there, right? So you've got potentially systemic bacterial or viral infections, or you may have a localized one, like in the cavitation, at the site of a root canal, or a microbiome imbalance in the colon. There's just a lot of
Interesting.
possibilities.
So how do you test for all of this? So you've got like, these 5 or 6 different potentials. I mean, millions of people have autoimmune dysfunction.
Mhm.
And so you've got these 6 or 7 different triggers that could potentially trigger the autoimmune dysfunction, your body attacking itself, misidentifying a protein or some type of invader, right? How do you know if it's the toxic overload or the gluten sensitivity or the pre-existing virus infection or the trauma, or if it's all of it? How do you know? How do you test for that?
Well, first I just talk with people for a very
Mm,
long time. It's like our current Western medical model does not lend itself to these deep dive discussions with people,
not
really,
anymore.
sadly.
Hmm.
Not anymore. But I'll spend at least an hour with somebody
Wow.
initially. And then, when you kind of, they come in for one thing, but then I just take a very thorough history. So I'm asking them, they come in for their brain, but then I'm asking them about their gut and what they're eating, and, like what's happening in their joints, or, I'm a very thorough history. So then you start getting clues like, I better check, do a stool analysis for like the microbiome gene mapping, or maybe they did get, like, I look at like environmental history, what did they do for a living, where did they grow up, did they grow up next to a refinery of some sort, like were they a big hiker, did they have they had a history of multiple tick bites, what's their energy level, like not everyone with an autoimmune disease is exhausted or has like flu-like symptoms all the time. So you kind of try to kind of start pairing these clues together, and then pretty soon, like a story emerges that this could be a likely possibility, and maybe you have like three possible options in your differential, and then you just do testing for those, and then usually I'll be able to find out.
So you'll be the health detective and do the testing and then follow the protocols. Now, this is something you have experience with because you yourself healed Lyme in your body, which is
Yeah.
phenomenal. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah. Definitely a lot of what I learned was my own journey of going through Lyme disease. I in 2004, was seeing a patient one day, and back in the days when we used to write our chart notes by hand, and right at the end of the appointment, I realized like I couldn't really grip my pen. And I was like, what the heck? I was like trying to get my hand to move, and it wouldn't move. And then I stood up to walk the patient out the door, and I wasn't walking correctly. And then I felt like my tongue stopped moving correctly. And it was
Wow.
just all of a sudden, I was like, my God, I'm having a stroke. So anyway, I called my husband and said, please take me to the emergency department. And before I left, I drew my blood for tick-borne disease testing, because I'd been camping a couple weeks earlier, and I had taken a little tiny nymph tick off the back of my daughter's ear. And it was just like, I saw it before it attached, but the fact that I saw that, like I knew, we were exposed, we were in an endemic area. And sure enough, if after a multi-thousand-dollar workup in the hospital, leaving with absolutely no answers and still not being able to like grip my sandal on the way out the door, I
Wow.
then 2 weeks later my Lyme test came back positive. And
Wow. How was
that,
your daughter? Was she okay?
yeah, she was fine, because the tick had not attached to her, and she was fine.
But it attached somewhere to another tick attached somewhere to you.
Probably, I didn't even see it. So it's
Wow.
just like they're the size of a little period on newsprint or something. They're so
Oh,
tiny,
tiny.
the little nymph ticks. Yeah. So anyway, I Yeah, at that time, so 2004, relatively early on in my career, maybe 6 years in, I was I was diagnosing a lot of Lyme in people, but I wasn't treating it myself as much. I would co-manage people with Lyme specialists, and I was like friends with and colleagues with the really good Lyme specialists in the Bay Area. And I knew them all and talked to them, and they all said, "Oh my gosh, you got to hop on 2 antibiotics. This is central nervous system Lyme, and you're going to need to be on these for a really long time." And I did, according to their recommendation, and I couldn't even last 3 weeks. I was off of them within, I don't even know, like 18 days. I was just like, I can't do this. This had so many side effects and just felt horrible. And I was just like, this doesn't really jive with my orientation anyway, this kind of chemical warfare mentality. And I'm not like fully against antibiotics, and I definitely use them sometimes, but it was just, for me, I knew it was not going to be my path. So then I had to forge my own path, working with intravenous nutrients or oral homeopathics, herbs. And then I got into oxidative therapies like IV ozone. That was incredibly helpful.
Huh.
And then, yeah, and then I started working even on other levels of doing some really deep energetic work on myself, working with energy healers, and kind of developed a personal practice on my own as well.
Which I think is phenomenal. So you've taken this idea of maybe 5 or 7 different types of possibilities. You test for everything, and then there's literally 5 or 7 different modalities. I mean, probably even more, that you would address or use in order to work with somebody in that has a serious health challenge. Can you explain?
I love how your mind works, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's not.
How does this work? Is what I'm trying to figure out. Like,
and there's a lot more than 5 different modalities.
I'm sure.
Like, in almost every case, there's at least 30, right? Like,
30.
So yeah, it becomes a kind of like a really interesting art of kind of combining, what I've learned in my education, what I've learned in my experience of working with patients, what patients have taught me, what I've learned from my own journey, what I've learned from even just following my intuitive guidance, with people. So it's like,
my brain wants a quick fix. It wants the solution.
We got
okay,
5 underlying causes and 5 solutions. No, not quite like that.
I'll take 5 quick fixes.
Yeah.
I'm such the Western mind, but I get it also that it's this whole thing. And you have this wonderful concept that you pull from this unified field.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love it if you could talk about dynamic. It's lots of different things that permeate everything. So let's open our minds a little bit. If you could talk about that, about the unified field.
Oh my gosh, I'd love to. It's my favorite topic.
Yay.
Yeah, I mean, it's so it just, I think what it really, I'm going to just preface it by saying, I was pretty good at, over time, got better and better at kind of sleuthing out these underlying issues. And then I wasn't satisfied with just like merely kind of putting a little Band-Aid on things, I wanted to fully resolve these things. And too often in the earlier days of my practice, I would diagnose something and treat it, and then the person would be back with something else. And then I would treat that, and they would be back with something else, and then it would be something else. And so it kind of kept me kind of asking deeper questions of like, what am I missing under this? What's under this? What's under this? And it kind of brought me into studying the energetics of health. Like what causes dysfunction in the body? Like really what is it? And then that brought me into studying physics. And so probably for the last 15 years, I have been deep diving into physics and unified field theory, and really learning that a few important concepts that really shape my thinking, like really learning that we live in a field of energy and information. Not only do we live within it, but it lives within us. Like we are inextricably connected to this field of information. We're derived from it.
Mm-hmm.
And so is everything else in our material reality. And so, so then you can take this kind of holistic concept of body, mind, spirit, like a whole quantum leap higher of like, yeah, we're body, mind, spirit, and connected with everything else. Absolutely everything in our environment and every part of creation. And so that was one concept that really influenced me. And the second was learning about something called the lighthouse theory, that we are not static. Our bodies are literally, and everything else in creation is literally flickering in and out of existence every trillionth of a second, trillions of times a second. And so how is that possible when we have 37 trillion cells, each with, millions of chemical reactions happening every second, and then we have these chemical reactions happening in every cell in a coordinated manner? How is this complex multicellular organism, how is it that we are flickering in and out of existence every trillionth of a second? How do we reform? Like, what's causing that? And so then that really brought me into thinking about this concept of a blueprint, a three-dimensional blueprint. If we are just emerging out of the sea of energy and information from kind of intersecting vibratory patterns every trillionth of a second, like where are the instructions for that? Where's the blueprint?
It makes, go ahead. I want to have lots of questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it makes so much sense around the intentionality of health as well. Because what you're talking about here is if you have all of these different blueprints and flickering moments in our existence, if we could set and reset our intentionality for health, we could very well start to heal ourselves with our own intentions in our own mind, and then the lifestyle choices follow.
That's right.
That
gives
is
us
empowering.
new opportunity every trillionth of a second to completely reform anew. And so then what is causing us to kind of degenerate and age and develop these diseases over time? Like, my sense is that there becomes something that's interfering with the fidelity of the translation of our blueprint, and that is misinformation. So misinformation comes in many forms. So comes in the form of the energetic signature of a toxin, or the energetic signature of a pathogen, or the collective energetic signatures of kind of unmetabolized emotions left over from a childhood trauma or something like that. Wow. So you get this kind of reverberating in the system, and it begins to be like static on the radio in this kind of bidirectional communication that's happening between our blueprint and our physiology. And
this is how you look at disease.
Yeah. And so now it's really about like learning how to reduce the accumulation of further static, and also either removing or transmuting the static that already exists. And so a lot of the therapies that I'm working with are kind of working on that level. And then, my book was really written to kind of help people kind of make lifestyle decisions from a different lens.
It sounds like a great concept. I mean, starting with the book, and thank goodness you wrote it. If you want to really take someone out who's in a complex health challenge to at least the idea of understanding what you're talking about, the book is a great idea on how to look at this. And then you're speaking the same language on all of these different degrees of health and energetic signatures. I'm super curious if you've ever looked at the energetic signature or blueprint of something like COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly thought about it. And I think, it has its own signature that has created incredible disruption in people's body. So,
right?
and then, even after it's cleared, that signature seems to reverberate in many people. So that, I've unfortunately seen it kind of rekindle dormant autoimmune diseases, fan the flames of any area of your body, be it brain or joint or intestinal tract, that previously was inflamed.
Right.
Just, or was to a very low degree, it really magnifies that. So yeah, I mean, it's just been a lot of work over here, in the trenches, trying to get people's systems calmed back down after COVID infection and get their immune systems back in balance and deal with all the secondary issues that have occurred in the stress of the illness. Yeah, it's been a lot. It's been a lot for people.
I mean, have you ever thought about if it evolved from anything or where it came from? Have you really thought about that? Because it really has disrupted our health system internally, our health system, without having any pre-immunity to it. Isn't that odd?
Yeah, no, I have definitely thought a lot about it. Very peculiar virus.
What was that?
It's a very peculiar virus with some, looks like some genetic manipulation happening.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Looking from your perspective. So back to the idea of looking at the body as this beautiful, complex system and the various different ways to help bring back to balance these complex systems. Let's look at something that isn't a disease, but it is chronic, like aging. It is something that happens in the body, and there's a lot of myths around aging that you have to slow down, or you have joint pains, you can't get up as easy, your eyesight goes, all these things that go around. What is your perspective of aging and longevity?
Oh my gosh. It's a topic I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about, because I don't buy into it that you have to degenerate as you age. I do not agree with that at all. And I don't even agree that you have to lose your eyesight, or you have to, your brain has to slow down or any of that. And I think that aging is like any of the other things that I treat here, disease processes. There are some basic underpinnings that can be addressed. And I think that reverse biological aging is something that's very possible. And I feel like I've been engaging in that myself and done that with patients over many years now. And I see the results and people are so happy with them. So really, when I think about it, first of all, you want to reduce the accumulation of dissonance so that you have better communication with your blueprint, so that you're forming anew by proper operating instructions, so to speak. And then you want to deal with some of the traumas that you've experienced in your life. So you're not kind of hauling around this like dissonant baggage with you your whole life, so that you're actually, kind of moving into deep meditation and kind of identifying with stuck areas in your body and dissonant kind of information in your system and learning how to ground that off. So those are the basics there. But from a science of reverse biological aging, it mostly comes down to, how do I support my mitochondria? So mitochondria are little intracellular organelles that are considered the powerhouses of the cells. They take oxygen that we breathe and glucose from our diets, and they run those through a series of enzymatic steps to produce ATP. And ATP is like the energy currency of the body. And really, we age because our mitochondria age, and not the other way around. Our mitochondria don't age because we age. We age because our mitochondria age.
Okay.
So if we can engage in lifestyle practices and utilize certain supplements and technologies to enhance something called mitophagy, which is where the body will edit and repair damaged mitochondria and birth new kind of robust, pristine mitochondria.
That was my next question. So that's possible.
That is possible. Then you restore energy production, and then kind of going back to the unified field. I think it's one of the ways we almost plug in to the infinite energy of the field. when your mitochondria are these perfect little kind of energetic plugins, so to speak.
What is that
And
called?
when we're talking mitochondria, mitophagy,
Mitophagy. Okay.
mitophagy. So, you've got hundreds to tens of thousands of mitochondria per cell, and we have 37 trillion cells. So, you can think about how many mitochondria are in the body.
Wow. So you have
Extraordinary.
the opportunity to bring each one of those mitochondria back online and they can restore themselves.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
can.
And there's a lot of good data there. So, I mean, there's lifestyle practices that everyone can engage in, like caloric restriction. There's tons of data on caloric restriction.
Is that
So
the
that's where,
intermittent fasting idea?
oh, that's a different idea. But like caloric restriction is like kind of almost like eating to 80% full. So you're
Less.
just you're eating less. And there's just been tons of research on that. People who eat less live longer. Animals that are fed less live longer. And it's a bell-shaped curve, right? Like you eat too much, your health declines and you won't live as long. You don't eat enough, of course, that's not good either, but it's like, there's this sweet spot, which is usually at that kind of 80% full mark where you're like, I could eat more, but I think I'm just going to wait for a minute and see how I do. So caloric restriction. And then the other lifestyle practice that has good data is intermittent fasting. That's huge. So intermittent fasting, people are trying to shrink their eating window down a little bit. So instead of eating just kind of randomly throughout the entire time you're awake, you try to shrink it down to where, you're eating in a 8-hour, 6-hour window. And usually that involves skipping a meal. Maybe you take breakfast off, or you maybe do dinner, and there's different kind of pros and cons of each, depending on the person. But you're moving your food consumption into a smaller period of time so that you can fast the other period of time, or take in things that don't take you out of kind of ketosis, because you will move into ketosis and during that time, and then that stimulates autophagy, which is the same thing that we do with mitochondria, which is where we edit, remove damaged cells, either repair or remove damaged cells and produce new ones. So, but with mitophagy, you're doing the same with mitochondria.
Fascinating. Now, the eat less idea is, do you start with maybe making a food journal, and what amount of food are you, I hear you saying 80% full, but are you saying 2 meals a day? Are you saying
It's so variable.
Yeah.
It's variable. Just totally depends. Like, are you a breastfeeding mother? Are you pregnant? Are you a triathlete? Are you a sedentary office worker? Are you premenopausal? Are you postmenopausal? Like where, everyone has different needs. And so it's really about looking at how you feel, at the stage of life you're in. There are certain people that are at certain stages of life where it's not appropriate to intermittent fast, and you don't skip meals. Like if you are nursing mom, or you're pregnant, or you're a triathlete, that wouldn't be such a great idea. But, or a growing teenage boy, for example, it's not going to work so well. But if you're menopausal and your metabolism is changing and you're starting to accumulate fat and your body composition is really shifting, that's a sign like, okay, the things that I was doing are no longer working. What can I do to shift it up? And so that's when you need to start experimenting and really looking at what works and what doesn't work.
I was going to ask you about menopausal women and the drop in estrogen after a certain age, and what you can really, yes, food is a great idea to disrupt the system and to create something new, but what about that chemical factor of the hormone decrease in the body? Do you believe that is something that you can combat? Do you, or do you go with it? Tell me a little bit about your opinions on menopause.
Yeah, it kind of, again, depends on the individual, but if as the ovaries stop functioning, the adrenal glands really try to pick up the slack, because the adrenal cortex can make a variety of steroid hormones for you. So they, the adrenal cortex throughout your whole life makes cortisol, DHEA, pregnenolone, aldosterone, a portion of your testosterone, but they can also make estrogen, estradiol. And so usually as your ovaries start producing hormones less predictably in perimenopause and then, stop functioning altogether in menopause, the adrenals will be trying to fill in the gap, so to speak, and make more, testosterone production, estradiol production. And how healthy they are going in to menopause really determines how good you feel in menopause without supplementing additional hormones. So, so there's a whole kind of spectrum of strategies. You can use adrenal support postmenopause, perimenopausally, to see if that's enough. Can you work with glandulars for the adrenals? Can you work with adaptogenic herbs? Can you even work with some of the adrenal hormones like DHEA and pregnenolone where appropriate, that are precursors to the production of estradiol and testosterone? And for some women that's enough. And for others it's not, and so it's really about lifestyle. It's about how your quality of life and what you're experiencing. Are you able to sleep at night? Do you have any sex drive at all? Do you have, are you losing your memory now? Is your well-being severely compromised? And if so, and there aren't like glaring risk factors, then I would completely advocate bioidentical hormone balancing for women.
Interesting.
And I think the data supports doing that.
Ah, that is fascinating. And so do you help with all of these things? Everything from what we were talking about with the compromised immune systems all the way through to weight loss, and where it comes to the aging process, all of these things.
Yeah.
And that's interesting that you do manage all of it, because you would usually go to a different specialist in the Western medicine system for individual, like endocrine specialists and hormone specialists, etc. But you're saying that everything is the same.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because, people will have a neurological issue, and let's say, and they go to the neurologist and they're really good at labeling things, and then they don't have great suggestions of what to do, unless it's purely pharmacological management. It's not like a deep probing as to like, well, why do you have this? Is there anything we could identify and unwind, to help reduce the rate of degeneration or slow the course or even reverse, heal the brain? Same seems to be true, the frustration that patients, it's really about like what comes to me. Like people are just super frustrated, going to an endocrinologist, and they feel their hair's falling out. They feel like crap. They don't sleep well, or their energy is terrible. Their metabolism is slowed way down, and they don't overeat, and they're exercising, and they're just like, what is going on? And, the endocrinologist does some basic testing, says you're fine. And people come to me and I'm like, no, you're not fine. Clearly you're not fine. Let's figure out why, So whether it's an endocrinological issue or a gastrointestinal issue or a cardiovascular issue or neurological issue, we're going to try to figure out what's going on, and to the best of our ability, support the system to help, kindle this innate wisdom to kind of like unwind these things. So, and we left off, because we always go on tangents here, but on mitochondria, because almost every single thing has a mitochondrial dysfunction basis, from aging to neurodegenerative diseases to cardiovascular diseases to fatigue states, and you name it. And so what else do we do there? So we've got these lifestyle practices that everyone can engage in, which is, the caloric restriction, intermittent fasting, ketogenic diets. And there's so many more lifestyle practices that actually help mitochondria, like getting outside in the morning and putting your feet on the earth and getting some sun, in your eyes, literally, in the morning, so that you can kind of like trigger some like a good circadian rhythm, which is so important for the mitochondria. But but there's also technologies that we take advantage of here, and intravenous treatments and products. So like, I've been a really early adopter of red light, near infrared light therapy, and there's tremendous data on upregulating mitochondrial function with like the typical red light and near infrared light therapies. And so that's why there's tens of thousands of studies on neurodegenerative diseases and benefits there, or benefits with head trauma, and but you name it, because almost everything has a mitochondrial dysfunction basis. So the red light and near infrared light wavelengths will really kind of address kind of the underlying issues that are involved in disease processes. So in the mitochondria, you've got that series of enzymatic steps, and the final enzyme, cytochrome C oxidase, will often get blocked by intracellular nitric oxide. And that enzyme is photosensitive to those particular wavelengths, and the wavelengths will change the configuration of the enzyme, so the nitric oxide is released and the enzyme is liberated to produce more ATP again. So the red light and infrared light is so helpful.
And that's something, yeah, that's just one of the things, but you have a lot of great technologies. And the red light therapy, I didn't know that there was so much that it actually, contributes to. And those are easy. These are all these biohacking techniques on top of what you're talking about. How to find some cutting edge technologies that exist out there that can really help optimize health. Because we do have a lot of environmental stressors. We do have a lot of food stressors with our, the soil being depleted and so forth. Yeah, that would lead to a lot of neurological disorders, which we're seeing a lot of. So these types of technologies can, again, go back to that mitochondria, that mighty mitochondria, and see if it could start to, is that kind of the basis of where you start with things? The mitochondria.
Yeah, at least want to include therapies directed at the mitochondria for everybody I see. And not everyone is coming here, so at least there are some really good things you can do on your own, like I mentioned already. But here we also have intermittent hypoxic training, which is so good for the mitochondria, and there's great data there. And that's where you're lying in a comfortable recliner chair and you're breathing oxygen through a mask, and the coach cycles you from normal levels of oxygen to mild hypoxia and back 4 times in a session. And so it's like being at sea level and going up to altitude and coming down, up and down 4 times in 40 minutes. And that triggers the release of something called HIF-1 alpha, which has all of these incredible effects in the body. And one of them is stimulating mitophagy and also enhancing the coupling of oxygen with the first enzyme in the electron transport chain, so that you do get more ATP production.
So these are great for athletes, but it's like why you hear athletes training at altitude and why that works. But this is bringing up and down the blood oxygen level in a session of just maybe over 40 minutes or something, right?
And actually 3 scientists won the Nobel Prize in 2019 for figuring out why this works. And so this molecule HIF-1 alpha that's produced when you do this type of therapy not only enhances the mitochondria, but it also causes you to make more red blood cells. You have better oxygen delivering capacity in the blood. It causes you to sprout more capillaries, so you have better blood delivery into the tissues. It also helps bring down your blood sugar in your bloodstream by virtue of opening up kind of like channels into the cell. It releases tissue-specific growth factors, kind of brain-derived neurotrophic growth factors. So it's very healing for all neurological type conditions, very good for peripheral neuropathy, great for reversing diabetes. It's incredible.
Are these in your book, your Pristine Blueprint?
Some of them are. Some of them I was using at the time I wrote that book, and some will just be in the next book. Yeah.
But that's a great starting point, the book, Your Pristine Blueprint.
It is good, because I kind of really just map out this whole terrain of kind of energetic therapeutic devices. Because, like I said, we're part of this field of energy and information, and we're derived from it. So why don't we let the field be our medicine? why don't we, like, I think where medicine is headed is we're going to be treating health conditions with information signatures, electrons, photons, phonons from sound therapies. These are going to be the medicines of the future.
Fascinating. So now you can do these pretty much at the center you're in. It's the Jyzen Center.
Jyzen Labs.
Jyzen
Hmm.
Labs. Hmm.
Yeah, and it's a biooptimization facility. So
Fascinating.
it's like the intersection of biohacking and integrative medicine. So where we're the doctors here, myself and my three colleagues, as well as our Jyzen coaches, are curating programs for people where they are taking supplements, maybe engaging in some IV therapies occasionally, and then also running through the technologies from infrared ozone saunas to Vasper training devices, which I can talk about, to the red light, near infrared light beds, to cryotherapy, intermittent hypoxic training, both passive version and active version, hyperbaric oxygen.
Now, what if you can't get to the actual center? Are there other ways, in addition to the book, to find out more about this or read up on this, maybe have remote sessions and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely do remote sessions, and there are other centers that have some of these technologies. And what's different about our center is, we have a lot more under one roof, but we also curate programs for people. So it's like, people that are biohacking, some people are doing a great job of it, and some people aren't, because they maybe haven't read the science, and they, it takes some trial and error, or they're overdoing certain things. With a lot of these, there's this concept of a little bit of stress is good, too much is not good. And so, but a little bit of stress is better than not at all. So there's this kind of bell-shaped curve, and a lot of these therapies are actually creating a little bit of stress in the system.
I completely understand this.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, that's even the basis of exercise too. You over-exercise, that's not good. You under-exercise, that's terrible. So like, what's your sweet spot in the middle? Same is true with red light therapy. Same is true with pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. Same is true with cryotherapy. So sometimes people are not using the therapies properly.
That is very true. I noticed that when I'm more active and more busy, I feel more alive. And if I'm
Yeah.
very sedentary and not much going on in my life, I feel it's difficult to get up. I oversleep. I'm lethargic. I operate, and I think it has to do with just my natural body's rhythm can be very slow. And then I look for things that are more interesting and inspiring and active in order to counteract my natural body's rhythm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So some people might say I'm too busy, but I like it this way. I operate better this way.
Me too. Me too. A lot of people say I'm too busy.
I know, but we have this family motto, and it's the more you do, the more you can do. Meaning that the more active your mind is and the more engaged you are and the more interested you are in various things, the more you will continue to be. And it can happen at any age. You can go from, museum tours to playing bridge with friends. I don't know, but as long as you're staying active, it helps you not be sedentary in your life, which I think can create depression.
That's right. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Yeah.
Well, we're on the same page there.
Yeah.
There are some that really have a rhythm to life too, and it's not to negate that rhythm. It's a beautiful thing. But just for me, it's different.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are people that are, true introverts, and they are going to feel better just having a little bit of a slower paced life, and that's okay. It's just about figuring out what works for you.
Yes, absolutely. And I think sometimes reading a book and being in the mountains and doing things, that's not sedentary, that's inspiring.
Right.
You just got to find your rhythm and find your jam.
That's right.
Question about, though, we have a few minutes here, and this is an important topic around anxiety and depression, and some people say it's genetic, it's hereditary. What are your opinions on mental health?
big topic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there is a little bit of heredity there. For example, anxiety and depression, we inherit a gene that codes for a tryptophan transporter that shuttles tryptophan across the blood-brain barrier. And some people's shuttle protein works very well, and some people's is a little bit sluggish. And the ones with the more sluggish transporter tend to have kind of family history of depression and anxiety. So you have a little genetic component there.
Okay.
But I think that when you look at something like a mental health issue, like let's just stick with depression or anxiety for now, that you have to think very holistically about that. So, for example, we were just talking about hormones in women moving into menopause. Well, hormones in general, no matter what age you are, play a huge role with your neurotransmitter levels. It's almost like I've always said to patients, it's that your endocrine balance is the foundation for your neurotransmitter balance in the brain. And so, if you've got let's say you have a young woman and she goes on a birth control pill and there's not enough of that even synthetic estrogen being delivered into the system, she can develop new onset anxiety or depression. Or she gets an IUD that had too high of a progestin in there, like the old Mirena IUDs, that can suppress ovarian function, and then also almost throws that young woman into like a menopausal type state. And then adrenal fatigue plays a huge role. So like if you've lost, because your adrenals are working overtime, and then they poop out a little bit, and you've got lower levels of testosterone or DHEA or pregnenolone, that can have a huge effect on the neurotransmitter balance, and men and women. And then thyroid problems can have a huge effect on like serotonin levels, but also dopamine and norepinephrine levels in the brain in both men and women. And so there's this kind of like, whole terrain of endocrine imbalances that can create mood disorders in people. And then you've got to look at the gut and the diet and food sensitivities, because people say the gut's the second brain, and it absolutely is. It's like the brain and the gut speak the same exact language. And there's the highest concentration of neurotransmitters outside of the brain is in the gut. Wow. And the highest concentration of neurotransmitter receptors outside of the brain is in the gut. And so if your gut is reacting to a food you're eating or a microbial imbalance, you're going to feel those effects in the brain also. And so it's really important to take a look at the diets, look at the the gastrointestinal health. And then it's important to look at toxic burden too. Like, mercury and heavy metals can have mood effects. It's important to look at infections, because I think one day we're going to realize that most mental health disorders, definitely when we're talking bipolar and we're talking schizophrenia, but to a degree, even OCD, anxiety, depression, there's an inflammatory component in the brain. And so what's driving that inflammation? Is it an infection, or is it, again, loss of the steroid hormones that dampen inflammatory reactions? And is it loss of your immune balance that's leading to this kind of inflammation in the brain? And why is that? So I'm always the kind of person that's like, well, why is that? Well, why is that? Like, what? Yes. If that's happening, then what's below that? What's below that? And then, you have to look at trauma. Trauma that someone experienced, whatever someone experienced that's not been fully kind of excavated and, and dealt with, is going to have some effects. And our thinking, just, what thoughts are we habitually thinking? Do we have a high sense of ourselves? Like, do we have a good self-esteem, or, have we bought into some kind of messaging from our family and from our culture that's really diminishing us? And, because there's a part of you that will be kind of rebelling against that, and, sad that you're succumbing to that. And so then that's going to manifest in a mood disorder. So,
it really is all connected, and you've done such a wonderful job of explaining that. And And your book sounds great. It really helps introduce all of these concepts. Your Pristine Blueprint is the name of the book. And you phrase it in such a way of, let's get back to that. Let's get back to these missing keys of longevity and reversing disease and illness and really having that freedom in your body and transforming your life. Thank you so much. Dr. Beth McDougall has been my guest, and you're just a fountain of information. You have an answer for so many things. Thank you for this time.
Thank you so much. It's really been my pleasure to be on your show.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah,
And also,
fun.
if you heard something here that you want to share with someone, please share the interview through the podcast. You can listen at any time on demand on a podcast. That's The Aware Show. Just search it and you could say, hey, I listened to this Dr. Beth McDougall and she talked about your Pristine Blueprint and I want to share this with you. And it's a good way of doing it. So thank you again for everything. And we will be in touch soon. Take care.
Oh, great. You too.
Bye-bye. And until next time, I invite you all to just stay aware. Thank you.